everybody. It's Caroline Leavitt. I'm the co-founder of A Mighty Blaze with author Jenna Blum, which was started when the pandemic started. And now we're like in grade school already. We've gone from babyhood to grade school. So anyway, a few housekeeping things before I introduce our fabulous guests. You will all notice on the right there is a chat. That I've put stuff up there already, like some wonderful stuff about Elizabeth Searle, our guest, and I've put links up where you can buy her books. And we would love it if you would make comments in the chat and ask questions. Don't be shy. You don't have to voice your voice. You don't have to be on stage. I will read it for you in whatever kind of accent you want. So today is really special because one of the things that I love the most about working for the Blaze is getting to talk to writers I love and people I admire, and also friends I love who happen to be writers I admire. So we have here today Elizabeth Searle. So let me tell you a little bit about her. First and foremost, novelist and screenwriter Searle is a beloved, funny, always there for you friend. I mean, and that's just the best. She's also the author of 5 books of fiction and a rock opera, and co-writer of the feature film I'll Show You Mine from Duplass Brothers Productions. I'll Show You Mine drew rave reviews in the New York Times and more. It was released in theaters and on Apple TV, Amazon Prime, Peacock, and more. Elizabeth wrote Tanya and Nancy, my favorite 2 characters, the rock opera, produced in Boston, LA, Chicago, New York City, and more, which of course, because of the subject matter, drew major media. Her books are My Body to You, We Got Him, Celebrities in Disgrace, great title, which the New York Times called a miniature masterpiece, Girl Held in Home, and A Four-Sided Bed. Excuse me, Boston Globe paperback bestseller, finalist for an ALA award, now in development for film. Short films Celebrities in Disgrace and Four-Sided have screened widely at festivals. Elizabeth's rock opera and 2023 film have also drawn national media. She's at work at more fiction and scripts, including a novel screenplay thriller, Lock Her Up. Okay, so welcome, Elizabeth. I would love it if you would show the cover of your novel, which I've been trying to print out in my printers. Look at that gorgeous cover, cover. Yeah. This is the Drama Room, a collection of short stories now out from Period Springs Press. All these stories are edgily linked to real-life issues, from COVID to school shootings to sexual betrayals and politics. I want to read some of the praise, but I also want to say that I was telling Elizabeth before we got on the air that I usually don't read short stories. I used to write them. I don't anymore. And these short stories just had me enraptured. Mm-hmm. They are unlike anything I've read before. They're absolutely brilliant, involving, moving. They break your heart. They also are funny. She's just incredibly talented. All right, so Tom Perrotta has said of her work, gracefully walks the knife's edge between satire and ripped from the headlines. Realism, sexy, funny, creepy, and highly enjoyable. Ann Hood says, an electric talent testing taboo limits. Jill McCorkle says, love, violence, love, grief. If there's an edge, Elizabeth will push it. And I think that's true. And finally, from Jane Ann Phillips herself, surprising, edgy, and original. So, I'm just thrilled to have you here, Liz. And the way this book is structured is really brilliant too. It's in 3 acts: openings, arias, and finales. That immediately hooked me. Why was the book structured like this? And did you always know that it was going to be structured like that?
No, I didn't. And first of all, thank you for that incredible introduction, Caroline. You are just the most generous soul. Thank you. No, it evolves. I know there are always writers watching this, and, you figure out the personality of your story collection as you go along. And I was obsessed with script writing. As you know, I write both scripts and fiction. And for the last, I'd say 10 years, I've been, doing the rock opera, co-writing with David Shields and Tiffany Laquette this film. And so I was more and more script centered. And I love the 3-act structure in theater. I'm a theater kid,
Right, right.
often at the gatherings of writers, I ask, are there fellow thespians in the room? And there always are a lot of fellow thespians. And so I loved the idea, as I noticed that there are a lot of stories about actressy type ladies and ladies who are actresses. And so the 3-act thing, originally, Caroline, I thought of it just so I could put Tanya and Nancy in there, because there is a libretto in this book that was published in Post Road magazine, sort of like a story. And it was also in an anthology. And Tanya and Nancy's been such an obsession of mine, as you know, and I wanted to include that. It's short. It's the libretto actually to the 1-act chamber opera, which was the first thing I wrote about those two. I also wrote a novella and a rock opera, so obviously
Wow.
it's crazy. But I wanted it to have its own little place in the middle. And then it occurred to me, because as you said, there's openings as the first section. And in openings, just to give an idea of the stories, those are the younger characters in a way. There's a teenager, there's someone remembering being a teenager, there's a young woman, a middle-aged woman having a baby, and then there's a college-age woman, believe it or not, losing her virginity on camera, which is kind of a blending of a lot of themes.
Know.
Yeah. So that when you watch me. And then there's arias, the middle section that has Tanya and Nancy. And I just thought, Caroline, I can throw all my really strange things into arias, because I have some strange stories. Tanya and Nancy, a libretto for this rock opera about, in case people are so young they don't remember, Tanya Harding and Nancy Kerrigan, the ice skaters and the knee attack. Then I have one about Hammond Castle in Massachusetts. If anyone's been there, it's a strange and beautiful place, not unlike the William Randolph Hearst Castle or something where weird things happen. So that's a strange story. A story called Pandemic Porn, which isn't porn,
that's the I was thinking
it involves a kind of strange filmmaking. So there are the weird ones in arias, and then finales are the older characters, because the character range. So I felt like that gave it a bit of an arc. I like it when a book has some progression. So there are older characters experiencing in ways.
And I want to say the last story, I forget the title, but it has Joni on the cover for Joni.
Yes, that's right. Yes.
It's like the perfect, it crystallized the whole collection for me. It made it seem more like a novel to me, which is my highest praise that I can think about. So I wanted to ask you, the word edgy shows up in just about every rave I've read about you. As well as pushing the limits. That's, high praise, which makes me want to ask you, what does pushing the limits do for you? How much of a discovery process is this for when you are writing? And also, is there ever a point where you say, I've gone too far, or is there no too far?
There should be. I have to say, I have a kind of yin yang thing. Those who know me, I'm like, somewhat shy and reserved in a way, like I'm, friendly, but not this wild and crazy person. And when I write, I just let everything out. Like I go back to Caroline, remembering finger painting in kindergarten, which was like such a fun thing. Like they pour the paint on and you just splat your hands in and smear it all around. That was one of my early experiences of art. And I still feel that way. It's like this is a bad comparison, but some criminals, they have no conscience. Like they just don't have that in their brain. And when I'm writing, I should have a switch that says, don't do that, wait. But I like to push things. And anyone who might have seen our film that I co-wrote, I'll Show You Mine, these two characters are talking to each other relentlessly, trying to get at the truth and at dark secrets. And that's how I talk to myself. I'm always kind of,
well, that's where the authenticity and the most interesting stuff is. So it's also been said in all your reviews that you hold up a funhouse mirror to American society, which you do, because if things are so, you'll be reading a story and then all of a sudden something happens and you have to stop and say, what the hell just happened? In terms of everything, in terms of, there's a story about a school shooter that just blew my mind, because you never expect, you always ask the people like, well, what are your demands? And this kid's demand is so outrageous that you're just sort of, and yet perfect. I don't want to give anything away. But anyway, talk about holding up the mirror to American society.
Yeah, well, I'm a news junkie, unfortunately. My father was obsessed with the news, and my family watches politics like some family watch sports, just obsessively, unfortunately, these days. But I am always kind of absorbed in what's happening in the world. And I remember when, in terms of the Funhouse Mirror thing, when I first started writing about Tanya and Nancy doing, I was inspired in part by this quote from George Will, the political commentator, is conservative, and he was outraged by this story taking up 24/7 news coverage, understandably. And he said, this is a ridiculous story that has nothing whatsoever to do with life in America today. And I thought, a ridiculous story, yes, of course, but it has everything to do with life in America. To me, Tanya and Nancy was a microcosm, and only more so as we go on. And I feel that about certain news stories, Caroline. I'm sure you have some that obsess you. Now, you mentioned the school shooting thing. One seed of that story was the Virginia Tech shooting, where it was the creative writing teachers, tragically, who kind of had a glimpse into that shooter. And I had an experience much less dangerous or intense, but a student who was kind of a stalker, and I had to have campus protection take me to my car every night. This was teaching. Yeah. And so I knew that feeling, and a lot of times I take things in life, Caroline, I'm sure you do too, and turn up the dials, make it more dire than what it was. But that was, the Virginia Tech incident. I have been obsessed with the Boston Marathon bombing. That was a story, many stories. And COVID, is something that's in the book, was on the news, of course, was in real life. And as we were saying before the broadcast, it has been memory hold in a really, to me, scary, damaging way. This kind of amnesia has set in about COVID. Now, I think it's beginning to lift in a way, but I felt obsessed with that too, that wanting to write how COVID has affected so many people, like teenagers, older people. In my collection, I never go into the point of view of anyone who has severe COVID, but I get into the just this whole scheme of effects of that is something that interests me.
Yeah, absolutely right. I mean, what I love so much about it is that the pandemic flows through all these stories, but it's never just about the pandemic. It's like there's one story, When You Watch Me, which is about a sexual secret that a now grown woman remembers. And there's also this heart wrencher about a woman trying to have a baby. So I wanted to know, how did you find the pandemic affecting your writing then? And is it infecting, and how has that changed from now?
Oh, to me, it did. It had a huge effect on my writing. One reason I call the collection the drama room, which is a reference to how high school theater groups call their room the drama room, but also that we were all in these rooms, like in these little contained rooms, and as is sort of implied by this cover image, which I thank Kurt Lovelace for at the press. This young woman is sitting there. She's kind of an actress type, pretty and poised, but there's a lot going on. Her face is vibrating. And I feel like there was a lot of inner drama and on-screen drama going on, in this room, like in this contained space. And I found, I wrote a lot of things during the pandemic, including the film script. We were co-writing that, throwing it back and forth, just going crazy, and I felt like the sense of the anxiety made everything darker and more urgent. And I took some stories and went back and put the pandemic in just because it made sense to me. And also, I was obsessed with it. And not every story, like I spaced them out, but there's a continuing thread of the COVID and the pandemic in the collection.
You actually have 3 questions, which is great. So let's ask them. The first one is from Suzanne Strumpik-Shea. And Suzanne, I don't know if you remember, but I met you through Ellie Lippman in Northampton once. So welcome.
She's
anyway,
the best. She's the best. She's in Ireland. She's
oh my goodness,
from beautiful Ireland. Yeah.
Anyway, she says you've written a rock opera, a film, novels, and essays, and you've co-edited an anthology. How do you determine what subject fits what form or genre?
Oh, well, first I have to say one of the anthologies I co-edited with Suzanne Strefik, which we chose the topic of soap operas because that's one of, and so it's called Soap Opera Confidential, Why We Tune in Tomorrow as the World Turns Restlessly by the Guiding Light of Our Lives.
I love it.
And my husband came up with that subtitle, and we had all these women writers writing about, soap operas. So that was a fun one. I also did one co-edited with Tamara Wilson called Idol Talk. It was about women, not all women, actually, writers writing about teen idols and the effect. Yeah, like, doesn't someone spring into mind like who your teen idol was?
Oh yeah.
Yeah,
Oh, yeah.
Who was yours?
Who was my teen idol? I think I was just like set on the Beatles. I mean, when I was in sixth grade,
on each Beatle.
Yeah, of course. It was like Paul is my all. That kind of stuff.
Right. Yeah.
You have another question, which is
I want to
from
make
Henry.
Answer Suzanne's because that's.
Oh, okay. Oh, yeah. I forgot to do that. Sorry.
I think that like you try out, just like we were talking, Caroline, about point of view, like you try out different ones. Like with Tanya and Nancy, I did write it as a novella. I liked writing it as a novella. Then a chamber opera, then a rock opera. And like rock opera to me felt like the most natural fit for that topic. And with some of them, you'll try a novel or this or that, or an anthology. Like, there's so many different forms, but I'm always find myself advising other writers, try it out, like try out even a little. So, but hi, Suzanne in Ireland. That is so nice.
Here's our next question from Henry DeWitt. A Bloody Show, one of the most gut-wrenching stories I have ever read in my life. Henry wants to insist that this is the best account in literature of birth from the mother's point of view. Do others have other contenders? Did the author set out to outright that silence, a birth account to top all birth accounts? Actually, Henry, I have a story that's a true story that's even worse than that, but I don't want to take up Liz's time for it.
There are so many, Caroline.
But there are so many. I mean, women sit around and the thing is, it's a myth that childbirth is an easy thing. There's always like terrible, tragic things going on.
Well, I really appreciate that question, and a huge thank you to DeWitt Henry, who I wouldn't have been able to pull this collection together. He's just been such a supporter of my work. He obviously is a writer himself and introduced me to the great people at Pierian Springs and has done so much. But Bloody Show is the title of one of these stories, and it taps into the stages of labor. I actually wrote a whole novel where chapters were stages of labor. And an inspiration for me that I would totally recommend to anyone is the novel Motherkind, one word, by Jane Ann Phillips. And that is also just a really blow-by-blow account of, a birth night. And I remember when I was in real life having my baby, a wise person told me the advice. She said the one advice she'd give to anyone is expect things to go wrong, that people go in expecting it's going to be this perfect, because they've studied and they've taken their classes.
Right.
But it never is. And we certainly had, our share of drama, not quite as dramatic as in that. But I did want to, as DeWitt said, I hadn't read that many accounts, Jane Ann's definitely, but I wanted to open up that's I feel like birth, especially in these horrible times when everything's so trivialized and tabloidized, and birth is still this primal thing. No one can take that away. It's an important primal experience that you have, and I wanted to really delve into it. So I'm glad, and DeWitt has been so open-minded, a reader in taking in those accounts. But yeah, well, that was well stated.
It is. That one just like did me in. You have another question.
Oh, great.
This is great, from Elaine Durbach. In all of your courage, do your imagined scenarios intrude in your dreams? Oh, great question.
Wow.
Really interesting question. It's a great question.
Wow. Dreams are so important. I unfortunately often do not remember my dreams. Kind of rarely do I remember them. But I do find the whole process of writing, John Cheever said the process of writing is dreaming. And he used the example saying, like, you're in your childhood crib and a woman enters who's wearing your mother's dress, but she's your ex-wife. And it's like everything in your life is all mixed up. Or not, some elements of your life, other things intrude. And I think dreaming is a great metaphor for writing. It mixes things up. It gets at the primal elements that are in there. But for some reason, maybe because I'm a terrible insomniac, and maybe because my cats or our cats wake us up at like 2 a.m, or like, I don't think I go through whole dream cycles all the time. I would like to remember my dreams, but I do feel that process is similar with writing.
And guess what? You have another question too. This is another one from Suzanne, which it's actually from Gail Donovan, who's watching. Elizabeth, this book is so full of actors and acting. Who would play you in the movie?
Oh my gosh. That is a really hard question, actually. I would not know what to say who would play me. Luckily, I'm not in the book. But I would say that some actresses who pop into mind who could play me like characters, except a lot of the characters are more actress. I mean, I certainly did high school acting. I was signed up by a sketchy talent and modeling agency briefly in my 20s, but I'm not really an actress. But I love, intense oddball actresses. Diane Keaton's been on my mind a lot, as with many people. And I love Keira Knightley. I love, just a lot of these. They feel, Sissy Spacek, some of these would actually, they could play the older characters,
That's right. That's right.
Yeah, but the actresses who are really intense, that's what I like in an actress.
You have actually another question. This is so great. Thank you all so much for these questions. This is from Aaron Harleman.
Yeah.
Your dialogue is so naturally and dramatic. What are your secrets?
Oh, well, I have this great editor named Anne Harleman. Fantastic writer of many books herself. We both have won the Iowa Short Fiction Prize, among other things. And Anne has a magic red pencil. And, I've been in a writing group with her and Gail, who just asked the great actress question. And I get a lot of advice from them. But dialogue does really interest me, Anne, and everyone. And I think script writing has been really helpful to me.
Oh, yeah.
Obviously, you have to, my very first writings, Caroline, were a soap opera script, a radio soap opera script that my sister and we broadcast on walkie-talkies. Remember walkie-talkies? They were like these things that had an antenna. And so I did think in terms of dialogue. And then I think I sort of lost track of that when I was doing my earlier fiction. But I came back to it when I started script writing, and I love dialogue myself. And it takes a while. Like sometimes you're starting on a script but then at some point you do start to hear the voice, like it's like they are speaking. And that to me is, always a great transition that you can make. And then it comes really fast.
And you have yet another question. So here we go. This is from Jessica Treadway. Hi, Jessica. Can you talk about the difference between writing stories and writing novels and writing scripts?
Oh, great question. And Jessica, hello. And for anyone who's in the Boston area, Jessica has a book, and everyone who's in National, she has a book of stories coming out that's going to be awesome. And she and I are going to be in conversation on Sunday, October 19th, coming up at Newtonville Books. So we'll get to discuss a lot of these things. But yeah, stories, novels, I feel like I'm more a novelist in a way, Caroline, and it's hard for me because you mentioned in one of your questions that I cover a lot of time in a lot of these stories. Some of them I tried them as novels and couldn't really get them to work as novels, like When You Watch Me, which is the one about the woman losing her virginity on camera. And, I really, sometimes you just can't stop. Sometimes you start writing and again, you have to try it out. Right. Like I have used some of my stories to try out characters for a novel. Like my first book of stories is called My Body to You. And those characters in that story, I was trying them out. And then I wrote my first novel about a similar scenario with those characters called A Four-Sided Bed. And in this book, there's a story called The Ones Who Are Gone, which is a woman and her husband, and they're trying to have a baby, and they're visiting his family who are very right wing, and there's these political divisions and other divisions. And that was the seed of Lock Her Up. You mentioned my novel that I've been working on that's a thriller, where, you know, in Lock Her Up has a much different tone than this story, but you know, basically a woman is framed for murder by her right-wing in-laws, you know, and there are other, you know, there are characters on both sides of the divide who have, you know, varying degrees of sympathy. But I took the scenario of the tensions in the family and just upped it to the max in the novel Lock Her Up. But I find it's just trial and error of trying things out one way and just feeling it doesn't feel right, you know, that you wait until it feels right. And definitely some of these stories are from chapters of novels or attempts at starting a novel or characters I thought about, you know, for a long time, but then, you know, put them in a story. So it's such a, you know, and you can do both. The great thing about scripts that I'd recommend to any writer, and I know, Caroline, you've been, you know, having some script adventures, is you can do both. Like you can double dip totally. You know, you can take a novel you wrote and make it a script, take a short story and make it a script. So with scripts, you can do both, which I really like.
I wanted to go back to the topic of not so much birth, but about what comes after children, because there's a lot of stories about children trying to have them, losing them, having them, and not connecting. The last story that you have, which has Joni Mitchell as a backdrop, it just broke me. You know, when people say don't go there when you start talking about a subject, as I was reading that story, I thought, oh my God, she's going to go to this place and I don't want her to do this because it's just so terrifying. And you went there. And you went not only to a mother's worst nightmare, but going beyond that nightmare to another that's, all I'll say about it is it's longer lasting. So I have two questions. Do you think there's ever safety in life? And I sort of know the answer. And so the next question is, what do we do about there not being safety? And why Joni Mitchell?
Oh, well, Joni Mitchell's yet another obsession of mine, and was one of my early, I'd say, influences in writing. Like, just her lyrics were so poetic and so vivid. And I do have a short prose poem piece in a anthology about Joni Mitchell that's going to be coming out. And the prose poem piece is about how when I gave birth, I brought Joni Mitchell into the birth room. We had Court and Spark, and I was listening to through the whole, you know, through a lot of the whole thing. So you can tell how much I relate to her. And the story is called If You Play Joni Mitchell, which is said to the main character at a key moment. And yeah, there's a lot in there. These, you know, I am thankful, you know, I have not experienced what that mother went through. I was once at this beach that the story set on, caught in a riptide. My son was caught in a riptide. That was really terrifying. And just luckily nothing like the story happened, but at that incident, which was just the raw terror of the kid being swept away from you, was kind of one of the bases. And you know, she does go there, and for anyone, you know, interested in kind of brutally honest stories about, you know, motherhood and the kind of choices some women make and all of that, you know, definitely that last one. And that was another one, Caroline. It was like a novel in terms of how much I wrote, you know, a lot of it was cut.
Extraordinary, extraordinary. Well, Elizabeth has another event to go to, so we actually need to stop. But I want to remind everybody, go order from your favorite indie bookstore. I've put in links for you in this chat so you can reach that out. Reminder that this is being recorded. It's going to live forever on a Mighty Blaze YouTube station. So you can tell all your friends and you can watch it again and you can make comments again. I want to thank you all for, you know, the great questions. That was so much fun. And I also want to thank Liz for being here. Thank you times a million and for writing such a great book. So Liz, you hang on and I'm going to say goodbye to everybody else here and see you next time.
Thank you, Caroline, and thank you everyone who came.